Our story begins in the clone barracks on Coruscant. Captain Rex and the rest of the 501st Men were silent after hearing the final update on the Ahsoka Tano trial. Despite all of her warnings and all of the trust shared between her, the Jedi, and the clones, she was expelled from the Jedi Order and hunted down by the clones. And in the end, Ahsoka was proven innocent. Rex kept reading the report from the courts, stating that it was actually Barriss Offee who bombed the Jedi Temple, and Rex didn't know what to do, especially after learning what became of Ahsoka after the trial. Anakin told the 501st Men that Ahsoka was offered a chance to return to the Order, but she declined. Whether it was because she couldn't stand fighting for the Republic any longer, or because she no longer trusted the Jedi, she ultimately decided to leave the Order entirely. Rex wished she could have stopped to say goodbye, but he couldn't blame her for not doing so. Rex and the 501st followed right along with orders to hunt Ahsoka down. He knew some of the men, many in the Coruscant Guard, may have been ready to kill if need be. It was extremely hard to wrap his head around for Rex and for many others, and as the hours passed by, something began to change in these barracks. One by one, Rex watched these men converse with each other and slowly begin walking to their personal lockers to grab a set of armor, their belt with as much gear as it could carry, and their blasters. Among them, Rex watched Fives and Jesse go to their lockers, so Rex went to them and asked what was going on. Fives said that the men have come to an agreement. If their commander, Ahsoka Tano, is shown no loyalty by the Republic, then it's not a Republic they want to fight for any longer. Rex didn't understand. They couldn't just leave. They were clones. They were bred for this war, for the Republic. But Jesse snapped back that they're more than that. They're people who give up their lives every day for a Republic that wouldn't think twice about them dying. They've seen it with Krell, Ahsoka, countless battles that could never be won. Five said it's time for some change, and so the 501st Men were preparing to go on a sort of strike to show that they are not loyal to those who don't deserve it. They're loyal to people like Ahsoka, especially in times like these, when she's been abandoned by everyone else. Rex asked the men about Anakin. Aren't they loyal to him? And they can't just abandon him. And from nearby, Appo called out that of course they are, but they also know that they need Anakin much more than he needs them. He will be assigned a new clone unit in no time, and he will make it work. Rex looked around to see more and more men getting this memo, and all of them seemed to be in agreement. They will not stand for how Ahsoka was treated, and Rex was faced with a choice. He could report this 501st abandonment of their posts back to the Jedi, or to the Senate, or he could join them in support of Ahsoka. Hours later, Ahsoka Tano was deep in the Coruscant underworld, working on repairing her broken down speeder, when she heard a series of footsteps nearby. Ahsoka stood up in a position ready for a fight, but around a corner came Captain Rex and Fives. Ahsoka's face settled into a look of relief as she asked the men how they found her. Fives joked that they'd been assigned to hunt her down just a few days ago for a reason. They knew where to look. And Rex said she forgot to say goodbye. Ahsoka's expression twisted into guilt and sadness as she said she couldn't face them. She felt like she was abandoning them, and if she did say goodbye, it's likely they would have brought her right back in. She had to do this alone. Then Jesse emerged, and he told Ahsoka they had to do this as well, and Rex motioned for her to follow. Ahsoka followed the three clones outside of the small warehouse and into what was a huge abandoned speeder parking lot, and Ahsoka would be overwhelmed by the sight. Around 500 men of the 501st Legion stood before her, and as she appeared they all saluted to her. Ahsoka felt tears forming in her eyes. The loyalty from the clones was so admirable, and she felt even worse now. How could she tell these clones she wasn't coming back to the fight? Ahsoka tried telling Rex that this was unfortunately a waste of time. She can't come back. But Rex just placed a hand on her shoulder and said she doesn't quite understand. They're not asking her to come back. They're asking to leave with her. And Ahsoka looked back to the man with a wide smile. There were around 500 of them here. The rest of the 501st stayed behind in the barracks, but not one of them were going to say a word about what happened here today. And Ahsoka finally said she accepts the offer, and she told Rex they're going to need to find a way out of here. 1 month later, Ahsoka was at the front of a battle on Marana, with Rex and the clones firing close behind her. From the dense forest ridges outside the capital, Ahsoka Tano wielded twin vibroblades, flashing as she sprinted through scattered barricades and scorched concrete. She took these vibroblades from a commando droid, since she didn't have her lightsabers. And today, Ahsoka and the clones were fighting the Black Sun Syndicate that has been terrorizing this planet without any Republic support. Black Sun enforcers met her with a storm of blaster fire, but she twisted through it with her agility that few could match. Behind her was the roar of boots and the thunder of the 501st, as 450 battle-hardened clones were charging forward with coordinated fire. In the past month, 50 of the men have fallen in battles like these, aiming to take down crime syndicates and free people who needed their help. Overhead, Gunships peeled through the sky, unleashing strafing runs across the enemy's positions. The local militia, emboldened by their former Republic allies, followed close behind, ready to take back these streets. Ahsoka and these 501st men had borrowed some guns and battleships from a Republic supply moon after finding their way off of Coruscant a while ago. This was their purpose now, not fighting for a Republic that wouldn't fight for them, but fighting for the people of the galaxy instead. The battle quickly descended into brutal close-quarter fighting. Every street, every ally was a war zone. The Black Sun had turned Marana into a fortress. Supply chains were buried beneath streets. Turrets were welded into balconies. Droids scavenged and refitted into killing machines. But the clones were adapting on the fly, moving in small squads to clear buildings, breach safe houses, and outmaneuver any snipers. Rex led a unit through the shell of an old warehouse, flanking an entrenched position, cutting down half a dozen gang enforcers in the process. Meanwhile, Ahsoka moved with 5 of the best of the 501st right by her side, crashing through enemy lines. For hours, the 501st and the Marana resistance clawed their way through the city, leaving behind a trail of fire and wreckage. The casualties mounted. Several clones would fall to detonated traps or brutal Black Sun warriors, and one explosion hit Clone Trooper Tup extremely hard as he crashed into the wall. His ears rang, his mind felt dizzy, but he quickly got back up and into battle. No ground would be given back. As night fell, the fighting reached the central square, where the last of the Black Sun's command had dug in. The 501st launched one final push, grenades shattering their defenses, hail of blaster fire, forcing the remaining warriors to fall back to their transports. Ahsoka leapt onto the front transport's loading ramp, disabling it with a single strike before flipping off and letting it erupt in flames as it crashed back to the street. The remaining Black Sun vessels took off under fire, engines sparking, hulls smoking, dozens of them left behind, either dead or surrendering as clone troopers moved in to secure the city. Fires burned all around, casting a harsh orange glow over the battered skyline. Ahsoka stood in the ruins of the square, blades quiet at her sides, and around her the clones were gathered, a lot of them wounded, exhausted, but they were victorious, and the Marana militia emerged from cover, stunned at this outcome. They'd done the impossible, taking back their city, and as dawn would break over the city, civilians began to trickle out from underground shelters. There were no words, just silence, and then applause. Hands raised, cheers shouted, people embracing the clones as liberators for them. Children ran to the blue-striped armor of the 501st, and Ahsoka looked out at them and felt true purpose. These people didn't care about the politics of war or the betrayal on Coruscant. All they knew was that someone had come to fight for them, and that was enough. Rex gave her an understanding nod, and a bit later, the clones and Ahsoka would settle into camps out in the forest. They had set up camp beneath the canopies, tarps stretched between trees, helmets stacked in neat rows, and blasters cleaned beside small fires where the food gifted to them by the people was being cooked. Tup joked that it was about time they get some real food, and the brothers all cheered in agreement as they would begin to eat. Meanwhile, Ahsoka sat alone on a fallen trunk, blades resting beside her, as she meditated for a bit, and soon she would open her eyes, staring out into the nearby fire, wondering if Anakin knew what she was up to. She hoped that he could understand. She knew he probably did. She imagined him somewhere distant, still chasing the war, still bound by the chain of duty they once shared, still doing it all for Padme. But she knew he was alive, and that was all that she needed for now. She would see him again someday. She knew it. Deep down, and Rex stood nearby, arms crossed, quietly watching his men. Every line in his face spoke of exhaustion, but his eyes were holding pride for what they were doing. These clones weren't just soldiers of the Republic, they were brothers, unbound by any orders, instead by purpose. They all chose this path together, and it only brought them closer. Jesse laughed softly nearby with Fives as they bit off large chunks of the food, armor dented, paint chipped, but spirits more intact. Fives leaned back against a tree, glancing up at the stars, wondering what battles were going on out there. Nearby, Kix worked tirelessly by lantern, patching up the wounded with a mix of medical skill and gentle care with everything they had. The supplies weren't exactly in a surplus since leaving the Republic, but they had enough. His presence was steadying for the other men, and others would offer to help, but Kix just told them to eat. This work was relaxing for him. Nearby, one of the best pilots, Hawk, had taken first watch above the ridge, helmet on, blaster ready, but even he would feel different now. All of them did. Without the Republic, without the war machine driving them forward, the 501st had found something much more honest. It was a galaxy they all thought was worth fighting for. A galaxy they understood more than the Republic. And far across the stars, over the world of Ringovinda, Anakin Skywalker was leading through fire, with his blue saber striking at battle droids all around him. Beside him, Obi-Wan Kenobi moved with careful attacks as well, and behind them, the combined remnants of the 501st and the full might of the 212th advanced towards the Separatist forces. The war was changing every day, but the fighting seemed to continue constantly. Anakin fought harder now, not out of rage, but out of something deeper and unresolved. He missed Rex, Jesse, Ahsoka, all of them. Their disappearance left a hole that these fighting just couldn't fill. But beneath the frustration was a quiet, unspoken respect for their choice. They'd made the choice Anakin never could, walking away from the war, from the Senate, from the burden of everything. It was a choice Anakin would have made if it weren't for Padme. He fought for her, and he always would. The battle would rage on above the planet, but Anakin's thoughts drifted for only a moment. Somewhere out there, he knew Ahsoka and the men were fighting. The Republic knew of it, but they could never track her down in time to stop her. He didn't want to catch her. Anakin knew they were doing good out in the galaxy. And back on Marana, the clones and Ahsoka were settling into bed for the night. This was one of the better nights in a while, but at the edge of the camp, Clone Trooper Tup was fighting a terrible headache that suddenly came out of nowhere. He recalled an explosion knocking him down in today's battle, but it took a while to feel the effects. Tup tried closing his eyes, but then he suddenly came to a realization. Something in his brain just switched on, and there was no turning it off. Tup looked over to Ahsoka's tent, and under his breath he muttered, "Jedi, good soldiers follow orders." Tup knew one thing. Ahsoka has to die. She was a traitor. All Jedi were, and it was all he could think about. Tup grabbed his blaster, slowly walking over to Ahsoka's tent, unzipping it, and finding her asleep inside. Tup raised his blaster, again muttering to himself that good soldiers follow orders. Ahsoka began to stir awake, and Tup put his finger on the trigger. But right as he pulled the trigger, Rex dove right into him, tackling Tup to the ground as he fired. The blast was redirected enough to miss Ahsoka's head and instead hit her shoulder as she jolted awake. She rushed outside to find Rex and Hawk holding down Tup as he tried with all of his might to break free, his eyes fixated on Ahsoka, full of hatred, until Jesse fired a stun blast into him, knocking Tup out cold. Everyone stood in a stunned silence as Ahsoka felt the pain rise in her now wounded shoulder. She said they need to bring Tup into the city, ask for some medical help. He seems to have lost his mind, and if this is some sort of virus, then they need to make sure it has not and cannot spread to the others. What Ahsoka and the men didn't know was the explosion in battle somehow rocked and activated the inhibitor chip in Tup's brain. But for now, Tup and Ahsoka would go back into the city, find the local hospital. Civilians caught in the battle earlier were being treated, but there was enough room to get Tup into surgery examination while Ahsoka's shoulder was treated. And after a while, when Ahsoka was healed, she would head into the exam room to find the results from Tup's scans. There was apparently a large tumor discovered in his brain, but weirdly enough, it seemed to be active. There were signals coming from it, as if it were alive or activated, and Rex said perhaps it was somehow planted in there by an enemy, but Ahsoka wasn't convinced. There was no scar on Tup's head, no sign of entry, so Ahsoka had Rex, Jesse, and Fives undergo the same scans on their brains, and when the results came in, they would find that every single clone tested had the same brain tumor inside of them, but only Tup seemed to be activated. It was extremely concerning, as the clone with the active chip tried to murder Ahsoka, so Tup would have his chip removed and be monitored closely. When he eventually woke up, Tup was back to just being himself, maybe even more himself than ever. He had vague memories of what happened, but overall he just said he felt at peace, as if something in the back of his mind was finally gone, and the conspiracy only continued to grow. Ahsoka would take some time alone to consider everything. She and the rest of the Jedi never truly knew how the clones came to be. It was all mysterious, but they had no choice but to accept the army. She also knew of a mysterious Sith Lord that the Council thought could be controlling the war, and with the discovery of the chips, she had to wonder if the clone troopers were created for a purpose that no one yet understands. Overall, she would come to one simple conclusion. The Jedi need to know about this before more clone trips become active. And so a few days later, Anakin Skywalker and Obi-Wan Kenobi would have just returned from a mission to Obadiah, where they too unraveled some parts of the clone conspiracy. They learned that Dooku secretly created the clone army for the Republic, and why he would do this was a complete mystery, until Anakin was called back into the Council. Anakin would enter, and he would find Ahsoka and Rex in here. It was a shocking moment, and Anakin didn't really have the words, but he would quickly find out why they were here. While Anakin and Obi-Wan were discovering that Dooku created Order 66, Ahsoka and Rex discovered the inhibitor chips in all of the clone brains, and they found that when activated, it causes the clones to attack the Jedi. These two pieces of evidence would lead the Jedi Council to one rather simple conclusion. The clone army was created by Dooku to eventually destroy the Jedi. But the new question was how he could possibly do this. The Jedi had deeply studied the clones, and there was only one man in control of the entire clone army, Chancellor Palpatine. When Anakin said this to the Council, He expected everyone to agree with him that it made no sense. But instead, Yoda and Windu just looked at each other with a sad understanding. Every day, the Council became more convinced that Palpatine was fueling the war effort in order to gain more power for himself. Every day, the relationship between Jedi and Chancellor became more sour. Windu had begun to wonder if this mysterious Sidious was somehow influencing Palpatine, and all of these pieces of evidence were unfortunately pointing right to Palpatine himself. The Jedi would have to choose a path, and the Jedi Council, already worn out by years of war and being uneasy about Palpatine's growing power, could no longer wait. They could no longer trust what justice would be served through the Republic's systems, so they began to plan new, unorthodox ways to end this. Ahsoka and the 501st, operating independently outside the Republic jurisdiction, were the key. They had no political ties anymore. They had no allegiance to Palpatine. The Council would task Ahsoka with an off-the-books operation, infiltrate a separatist summit on Sereno, where Dooku was rumored to be gathering with his most loyal commanders of the separatists. The goal was simple: kill or capture Dooku, and uncover anything that could tie him to the Chancellor. Without real proof, any attempt to arrest Palpatine would look like treason, but if that connection could be made, then the Jedi could move swiftly and legally stop the Sith Lord they now suspected was hiding in plain sight. Sidious was either working with Palpatine, or he was Palpatine. Ahsoka would accept without hesitation. The 501st had changed since leaving Coruscant, and with the help of a few loyal Republic spies, they traced Dooku's ship to a fortress in the rocky highlands of Sereno, far past his castle. The fortress was heavily defended by droids and guarded by Grievous himself. Infiltrating the planet would not be easy, so Jesse would lead a distraction attack right for the middle of the blockade, while Ahsoka, Rex, and a bunch of other clones plus the Bad Batch would sneak around the blockade while the droids were distracted. The clones launched their assault at dawn, sweeping in with sudden ferocity, and the mountain citadel erupted into chaos. Grievous led the defense with his usual vicious strength, tearing through squads of clones with spinning sabers and brute force, but the 501st held the line. Ahsoka, flanked by Rex and Fives, pushed deep into the heart of the fortress, cutting through Magna Guards, slicing through sealed doors until they came face to face with Grievous, guarding the door to Dooku and the Separatist leaders. And at the same time on Coruscant, Windu, Yoda, Kenobi, and Balaba boarded a shuttle to the executive building. They arrived at the Chancellor's office under the guise of delivering strategic updates, but in truth, they were waiting for Ahsoka's signal. They didn't have the power to arrest the Chancellor without the Senate's consent, but if undeniable evidence emerged, then the Jedi could act under their emergency powers to secure Palpatine. Anakin Skywalker was not with them. Instead, he was with Padme. He was ordered by the Council to tell Padme what was going on, so the senators were ready, and back on Sereno, the battle would reach its ultimate peak as Grievous was finally brought down by Ahsoka, while Rex and Fives laid down covering fire, long enough for Kix and Jesse to bring a rocket to blow up the door. Ahsoka found herself with Dooku in the data room, with Gunray and the others looking on in anticipation. She held up her vibroblades, and Ahsoka dueled Dooku, but this was only a distraction. Far below this fortress, the Bad Batch infiltrated the power room, setting off explosives just before Dooku could kill Ahsoka. As the explosives rocked the fortress, Ahsoka leapt up into a vent, and Tech was able to seal all of the blast doors inside of the fortress. Dooku and the Separatist leaders would be trapped inside the exploding building with no way out. And as this facility began to go up in explosions, Hawk and Kix discovered a command archive deep beneath the war table in the Sereno castle. It was older tech, stored offline, untouched by any surveillance networks, and there, stored in fractured holo recordings, were encrypted conversations between Dooku and a shadowy figure in black robes. The voice was unmistakable. It was Palpatine. The two had plotted the war, orchestrated the cloning program, installed the chips, and designed the Jedi's downfall. It was all there. Dooku had kept it in secret in case he ever wanted to expose Palpatine and overthrow him, and Ahsoka transmitted this evidence directly to Coruscant, where it was received by the Jedi mid-meeting. In that moment, the room would change. Windu's eyes darkened. Yoda steadied himself. Palpatine was a Sith Lord. They had their proof, and Palpatine sensed this sudden change. The Jedi drew their sabers, and so did Sidious. Lightning flashed out of his hands immediately, and the duel would explode through the Chancellor's office, bursting through glass and fire as Balaba and Kenobi joined Windu Yoda to fight the Sith at the heart of the Republic. It was fast and brutal. After Sidious revealed his true identity, he was powerful, more than any of them could have expected, but he was outnumbered, and the Jedi would overwhelm him with their numbers. As Windu, finally able to see the end of the war that weighed on him so heavily, delivered the final blow. And when it was over, The body of Sidious lay broken on the floor of the executive building, and the galaxy had changed forever. From Sereno, Ahsoka, Rex, and the 501st clones that survived the attack would once more disappear. They did what they had to do in helping the Republic, helping the Jedi that they were friends with, but that was not where they belonged anymore. Had they never left, the clone conspiracy likely would have been kept hidden by Palpatine and Dooku, so they decided to continue living away from the Republic, helping people who needed them in the Outer Rim. And in the weeks that followed for the galaxy at war, the truth would spread quickly. Holo recordings played before the full Senate. Bail and Padme helped lead the movement to strip emergency powers from the Chancellor's office. The war collapsed without the leaders. The Jedi began to rebuild as peacekeepers once more. Ahsoka was a symbol of rebellion against corruption. She and the 501st further established their own network across the Mid and Outer Rim, helping worlds left broken by war to heal, to rebuild as a real organization. Anakin was offered a seat on the council. He accepted after talking with Padme. He'd seen where his arrogance led. He and Obi-Wan were working to reform the order from within, alongside Windu and Yoda, as well as the senators like Padme and Bail. All of them changed by what they'd nearly lost if it weren't for Ahsoka and the clones. And somewhere far from Coruscant, as the days passed by, beneath the trees of a quiet world, the former clones of the 501st sat around a fire once more. Ahsoka walked among them, with her eyes finally calm. They were not Jedi or Republic clones. They were free, and they were helping people in the galaxy feel like they could be free as well, day by day, dismantling Maul and his Shadow Collective, with the people of the Outer Rim behind them. And folks, this is our story for today. It's one I've had in my written down list for a very, very long time, and I just wasn't sure, I don't know, what path I wanted to take, but ultimately I decided it could be fun to kind of pursue a path where the clone conspiracy is kind of changed up a bit. Yeah, just because involving Ahsoka in that, I think, changes it quite a bit. So yeah, hope you guys enjoyed this one. Let me know if you did. It was, again, recommended a while ago. Always fun to write the clones. Ahsoka's a fun character, so appreciate you guys. Let me know what you want to see next, and I'll see you in the next video.